March 14, 1942, 10:15 a.m., Imperial Japanese Navy Headquarters, Tokyo. Admiral Nishizo Tsukahara held a document that should never have been written. It was a consolidated report of air losses against the American Flying Tigers over the past 3 months. The numbers were so devastating that he immediately classified the document ultra-secret and issued Naval Order 127S, discovered only in 1993 in the Tokyo War Archives. Effective immediately. All units would cease reporting specific combat losses against P-40 aircraft of the group known as the Flying Tigers. Such information was detrimental to morale and would be considered an act of treason if disclosed. What sparked the panic within the Japanese High Command were numbers that defied all military logic. Between December 1941 and March 1942, the Flying Tigers, operating with never more than 50 P-40 Warhawks simultaneously, had downed 217 confirmed Japanese aircraft. The Flying Tigers' losses, only 14 P-40s in air combat, a kill ratio of 15.5 to 1. To put this into perspective, Japanese military doctrine considered a 1-to-1 loss rate acceptable against technologically equivalent forces. The problem began on December 20, 1941, when the first detailed report arrived from the front. Major Mitsuo Fuchida, who had led the attack on Pearl Harbor just 13 days earlier, received reports from his squadrons over China. He wrote in his diary, recovered decades later, "The numbers must be wrong. How can 8 obsolete American planes shoot down 23 of our best pilots without losing a single one? I asked for a recount 3 times. The numbers didn't change." But there was more to this first encounter that Fuchida didn't initially report. Japanese pilots described something disturbing about the P-40's behavior. They didn't fly as expected. Instead of engaging in individual combat, the Americans maintained rigid formations of 2 or 4 planes. When a Zero tried to pursue a diving P-40, another would appear out of nowhere, attacking the pursuer. It was a deadly choreography the Japanese had never encountered. Lieutenant Hiroshi Okamura, one of the survivors of that day, wrote later, "We were trained to be samurai of the air, fighting honorable duels. They fought like a pack of wolves, without honor, but with terrible efficiency." Claire Chennault, commander of the Flying Tigers, had developed a tactical system specifically designed to exploit Japanese weaknesses. His pilots received strict orders: never engage in individual combat, always attack in pairs or quartets, use altitude and diving speed, never attempt to follow a Zero in a turn. It was a scientific approach to air combat, completely opposite to the Japanese aerial Bushido that valued individual duels and personal skill. Chennault had spent years in China before the war, observing Japanese tactics during the Sino-Japanese conflict. He kept detailed notebooks where he recorded every maneuver, every attack pattern. In a memo to his pilots dated November 1941, he wrote, "The average Japanese pilot has 500 flight hours. He has been trained in aerial acrobatics since childhood. You cannot beat him at his own game, so don't play his game. The Zero is a work of art, but it has fatal flaws. It has no armor. It has no self-sealing tanks. It's made of lightweight alloy that burns like paper. One well-placed shot and it becomes a torch. Our P-40s are flying tanks in comparison. Use that." The most revealing document on the psychological impact came from Captain Yasuo Kuwahara, commander of the 12th Naval Fighter Group. On January 8, 1942, after losing 11 Zeros in a single engagement against 4 P-40s, he wrote a desperate report. "The enemy does not fight with honor. They attack from above, shoot and run. When we try to pursue, another pair attacks from above. It's like fighting ghosts. Our pilots are developing a fear of flying when they know P-40s are in the area. What Kuwahara did not mention in his official report, but confessed in his personal diary, was even more alarming. 3 of his best pilots had requested transfers to bomber units. They preferred to fly in slower, more vulnerable aircraft than face the P-40s again. One of them, Lieutenant Jiro Tanaka, had been one of Japan's most promising aces, with 7 confirmed victories before encountering the Flying Tigers. After being the sole survivor of a formation of 6 Zeros, he never flew in combat again, claiming vision problems that doctors couldn't diagnose. The situation worsened in February 1942. Lieutenant Commander Takeo Tanimizu led a force of 32 Zeros and 18 Kai-21 bombers against Rangoon. They were intercepted by 8 P-40s of the Flying Tigers. In 17 minutes of combat, the Japanese lost 19 aircraft, 11 Zeros, and 8 bombers. Not a single P-40 was shot down. When Tanimizu reported these numbers, he was accused of cowardice and incompetence. It was only when other survivors confirmed the numbers that the command accepted the devastating reality. But the details of this combat were even more humiliating. The P-40s had executed what Chanot called boom and zoom, high-speed dives followed by climbs using the accumulated energy. The Zeros, superior in maneuverability but inferior in dive speed, could not respond. Each pass of the P-40s downed 1 or 2 Japanese planes. It was like watching a target practice demonstration with the Japanese as the targets. The gunner of one of the Kai-21 bombers, Sergeant Kenji Yamamoto, survived by parachuting and was captured. In his interrogation, he said, "I saw my commander's Zero explode in flames, then another and another. They fell like leaves in the autumn wind. The Americans didn't even need to turn. They just dived, shot, and climbed. Dived, shot, and climbed. It was a killing machine." The impact on Japanese morale was catastrophic. Pilots began to develop psychosomatic illnesses before missions where P-40s were expected. The term toramushi, literally tiger insect, began to circulate, referring to the paralyzing fear of the P-40s with their distinctive shark teeth paint. Medical documents from the time show a 400% increase in pilots reporting sudden illness when assigned to missions over Flying Tigers territory. The chief medical officer of Canton Air Base, Dr. Yoshio Nakamura, documented extraordinary cases. Veteran pilots with hundreds of combat hours developed uncontrollable tremors at the sound of Allison engines, the engine used in the P-40s. One particularly severe case involved Lieutenant Masao Sato, who had survived 3 encounters with the Flying Tigers. He developed a condition where his vision blurred whenever he looked upwards, the direction from which the P-40s usually attacked. Ophthalmological exams found nothing physically wrong. It was purely psychological. On February 23, 1942, the incident occurred that would force complete censorship. During a briefing for new pilots at the Hanoi base, veteran instructor Captain Mitsugu Kofukuda presented the real combat statistics. Of 100 pilots present, 31 requested immediate transfer to other units. 12 claimed sudden medical problems. The report of this incident reached Emperor Hirohito, who personally ordered an investigation. What the report didn't mention was the panic that followed. 2 pilots attempted to desert that night, being caught at the train station. A third, Second Lieutenant Yoshio Harada, committed seppuku, leaving a note that read, "I prefer to die with honor by my own hand than be shot down like a bird by those American demons." The base commander, Colonel Ichiro Sasaki, burned the note and reported the death as an accident during maintenance. The Japanese command's response was twofold. First, Naval Order 127S, prohibiting reporting specific losses against P-40s. Second, an internal disinformation campaign. New pilots were told the Flying Tigers had hundreds of planes, were veteran pilots from the European War, and used secret British technology. All lies, but necessary to explain the devastating losses without admitting tactical inferiority. The disinformation campaign was elaborate. They fabricated stories about Flying Tigers pilots being former RAF aces with dozens of victories. They invented secret technology, a new type of sight that guaranteed hits at long distances. They even spread rumors that the P-40s used a new type of fuel that made them 30% faster, anything to avoid admitting they were being defeated by superior tactics, not superior technology. Flying Tigers pilot Robert Duke Hedman, credited with 10.5 victories, captured the essence of tactical superiority in a letter home found in his personal archives. The Japanese fly like artists, each trying to be a hero. We fly like an American football team. They make beautiful acrobatics. We make touchdowns. At the end of the game, the scoreboard is what matters, not the style. Hedman also described the meticulous preparation before each mission. Chanot made his pilots study silhouettes of Japanese planes for hours. They practiced identification until they could distinguish a Zero from a Ki-43 at 2,000 meters. Each pilot received cards with specific weak points of each Japanese model. For the Zero, aim for the cockpit or the fuel tanks at the wing roots. For the Ki-43, the engine was vulnerable to frontal fire. It was an academic approach to killing, turning air combat into science. Technical analysis reveals another crucial factor: armament. The Flying Tigers P-40s were modified with 6 .50 caliber Browning machine guns, converged to concentrate fire at 250 meters. With each gun firing 13 rounds per second, a P-40 poured 78 12.7-meter projectiles per second onto a target. The Zero, with its ultralight construction, disintegrated under such a volume of fire. A Japanese veteran described it. It was like being hit by a wall of metal. The planes simply fell apart. But there was more to the armament story. Chanot had experimented with different types of ammunition. He discovered that alternating tracer, incendiary, and armor-piercing bullets created a devastating effect. The armor-piercing rounds pierced the structure. The incendiaries ignited the fuel, and the tracers helped with aiming. A captured Japanese pilot, Lieutenant Tadashi Minami, described, "I saw my leader's Zero get hit. First, small holes appeared in the fuselage, then smoke in seconds. It was on fire. The pilot didn't even have time to bail out. It went from intact plane to fireball in less than 3 seconds. But there was an even deeper psychological component. Japanese military culture did not allow admitting inferiority. Pilots returning from missions where they were outmatched by the Flying Tigers often falsified reports, claiming mechanical damage or adverse weather conditions instead of defeat in combat. This created a vicious cycle. The command didn't understand why it was losing, so it couldn't develop effective counter-tactics. A prime example was Major Takeo Yokoyama, commander of the 64th Sentai. After losing 5 planes in an engagement where he reported adverse weather conditions, he was confronted by a subordinate who threatened to report the truth. Yokoyama replied, "Do you prefer that our families know we were defeated by inferior barbarians? That our years of training were useless? Sometimes the honorable lie is better than the dishonorable truth." The subordinate agreed to remain silent, but wrote in his diary, "Today I realized we have already lost the war. We cannot defeat an enemy we don't even dare to name." The most extraordinary document emerged only in 2001, when the family of General Hideki Tojo donated his personal archives. Among them, a transcript of a secret meeting on March 3, 1942. Tojo said, "If our pilots know they are being defeated 15-1 by Americans flying planes, we consider obsolete. The impact on morale will be irreparable. Better they believe they are fighting against superior forces in number than inferior in tactics." Present at the meeting was Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, who had planned Pearl Harbor. His response? Censored at the time, but preserved in Tojo's personal notes, was prophetic. "Hiding the truth from our men is planting the seeds of our defeat. If we cannot learn from our mistakes because we refuse to admit them, then we have already lost. The Americans adapt their tactics daily. We still fight as our grandfathers fought. This war will be decided not by courage, but by who learns faster." The censorship had unintended consequences, without accurate combat reports. New pilots arrived at the front completely unprepared for the Flying Tigers' tactics. They repeated the same mistakes, suffered the same losses. Lieutenant Saburo Sakai, who would become Japan's top ace with 64 victories, wrote in his memoirs, "The worst thing they did was hide the truth." Each new pilot had to learn the hard way what could have been taught in a 10-minute briefing. Sakai elaborated further in his posthumous memoirs. Published only in 2000, I lost 3 wingmen in my first encounter with the Flying Tigers. All made the same mistake. They tried to chase a P-40 in a dive. I survived because I saw the third one die and understood the pattern. Had they been warned, those men would still be alive. But command chose to preserve the illusion of invincibility over preserving lives. I learned that day, our real enemies weren't the Americans, but our own arrogance. By April 1942, the situation had become so desperate, the Japanese High Command considered using kamikaze attacks 3 years before the first official kamikaze attack. The plan, discovered in captured documents, was simple. If they couldn't defeat the P-40s in combat, they would collide with them. The plan was rejected, not on moral grounds, but because they calculated they would lose 3 pilots for every P-40 destroyed, even worse than the conventional combat rate. The document detailing the plan, found in the Yokosuka Naval Archives, revealed the sheer despair. Captain Masahisa Uemura proposed, "We will select volunteer pilots with terminal illnesses or without families. We will equip Zeros with 250 kilograms of explosives. Upon impact, the explosion will guarantee the destruction of the P-40. Admiral Nishizo Tsukahara vetoed the plan with a marginal note. If we resort to this now, what will we do when we face their bombers? The economic impact was also devastating. Training a Zero pilot took 700 flight hours. With fuel, maintenance, and instruction, each pilot cost the equivalent of $2 million in modern currency. Losing 15 pilots for every P-40 downed meant $30 million in wasted training, not counting the cost of the planes. Japan, with its limited resources, simply couldn't sustain such losses. A memo from the Japanese Ministry of Finance, dated May 1942, painted a grim picture. At the current rate of losses against the Flying Tigers, we will exhaust our reserve of trained pilots in 18 months. The cost of replacing these losses exceeds our annual military budget. We strongly recommend avoiding engagements with P-40 units until effective countermeasures are developed. The memo was classified as top secret. Only 5 copies were made. Meanwhile, the Flying Tigers operated with brutal efficiency. Janol kept meticulous records. The operational cost per P-40 per month was approximately $12,000 in 1942 dollars. With the 15-to-1 kill ratio, every dollar spent by the Flying Tigers cost Japan $187 in losses. It was a war of attrition, and Japan couldn't win. Chanot also implemented a revolutionary maintenance system. Each P-40 had a dedicated team of Chinese mechanics trained by Americans. They could change an engine in 4 hours, repair combat damage overnight. A P-40 could fly 3 missions a day if necessary. In contrast, the Japanese, operating far from their main bases, struggled to keep 50% of their planes operational. A damaged Zero could be out of action for weeks waiting for parts. The truth about the kill ratio only became publicly known in Japan in 1947, during the war crimes trials. When presented as evidence of Japanese military incompetence, it caused a national scandal. Many veterans refused to believe it, insisting that the American numbers were propaganda. It was only when the Japanese secret records themselves were revealed that the truth was accepted. The most dramatic moment came when the American prosecutor presented the diary of Colonel Toshio Ota, found in his home after his suicide in 1945. Ota had secretly compiled the true loss statistics. His final entry read, "296 of our best pilots dead, 14 Americans dead." If these numbers were known, no Japanese mother would let her son enlist. We kept the secret and condemned a generation. I don't deserve to live knowing what I helped hide. Colonel Tateo Kato, known as the B-17 destroyer for his tactics against bombers, made a revealing admission before his death in 1942. "We can shoot down 100 bombers, but if we lose 15 fighters for every P-40, we lose the war." The Americans understood something we didn't. Modern warfare isn't about individual honor. It's about mathematics. Kato had tried to develop new tactics. He proposed coordinated high-altitude attacks, using the sun to mask their approach. He suggested nighttime attacks, when the P-40s were less effective. He even proposed copying the Flying Tigers tactics, flying in pairs, attacking and running. All his suggestions were rejected as cowardly and dishonorable. Frustrated, he wrote to his wife, "I know how to beat them, but they won't let me. They prefer to die with honor than to live with victory. This is no longer the war of the samurai. It's the war of machines, and we insist on being human." The final irony came from Claire Chanot himself. In his posthumous memoirs, he revealed that he never expected such success. His initial estimate was a 3-to-1 kill ratio in favor of the Flying Tigers. The 15-to-1 ratio surprised even him. Chanot wrote, "The Japanese helped us defeat them. Their refusal to adapt tactics, their obsession with individual combat, their inability to admit weaknesses, all of this multiplied our advantage. We changed tactics weekly based on what we learned. They flew in 1942 exactly as they flew in 1937 in China." Chanot also revealed a secret kept for decades. He had spies in Japanese airfields. Chinese coolies working at the bases reported every takeoff, every direction taken. The Flying Tigers often knew where and when they would be attacked hours in advance. It was an intelligence network the Japanese never suspected existed. As Chanot wrote, "We won not only through superior tactics, but through superior information. We knew what they would do before they did." The impact of this censorship reverberated throughout the war. When American Marines captured Guadalcanal in August 1942, they found diaries of dead Japanese pilots. Many still believed the Flying Tigers had at least 300 planes and were elite pilots selected from across America. The reality that there were never more than 100 pilots in total, many with no prior combat experience, would have destroyed what was left of Japanese morale. One of these diaries, from Second Lieutenant Hiroshi Yamada, is particularly revealing. Dated July 1942, months after the Flying Tigers were disbanded, he wrote, "They say the Flying Tigers are gone, but I don't believe it. They must be hiding, they're waiting. No human force could have done what they did. They were demons, not men. Yamada died the next day, shot down by a US Navy F-4F Wildcat, a plane inferior to the P-40 in many respects. Fear had become so profound that any defeat was attributed to the mythical Flying Tigers. One of the most poignant documents came from Lieutenant Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, Japan's top ace with 87 victories. In a letter to his fiancée, intercepted by censorship and never sent, he wrote, "They say we're the best pilots in the world, but the Americans treat us like amateurs. There's something they're not telling us. How many of us have to die before they admit the truth?" Nishizawa survived the war, only to die as a passenger in a downed transport plane. His fiancée received the letter only in 1995, when it was found in the censorship archives. She was 73 years old, and she wept as she read, "If I had known the truth," she said, "I would have begged him to defect. But we believed he was winning. We believed the lies because they were more comfortable than the truth." The Flying Tigers scoring system was also revolutionary. Each pilot received $500 for every Japanese plane destroyed. This created a direct financial incentive for efficiency. Compare that to the Japanese system, where the reward was honor and glory, noble concepts, but ones that didn't pay the bills of the families of dead pilots. A Flying Tigers pilot could earn in a month what an American worker earned in a year. Pilot David Lee "Tex" Hill, the third highest-scoring Flying Tiger ace with 1825 victories, earned over $9,000 in bonuses, the equivalent of $150,000 today. He later commented, "It was weird being paid to kill, but it worked. Each zero on my sights was worth a month's salary. It made me aim with much more care." The Japanese fought for abstract ideals. We fought for concrete dollars. It might seem mercenary, but we won, didn't we? Post-war analysis revealed another crucial factor: communication. The Flying Tigers used radios with crystal-clear frequency, coordinating attacks in real time. The Japanese, still clinging to concepts of visual signals and rigid formations, couldn't react with the same speed. It was like a modern football team playing against a 19th century team. The rules were the same, but the game was completely different. An intercepted Japanese radio transmission, translated after the war, captured the chaos. "Leader to Wing 2, where are you?" Wing 2 doesn't respond. "Leader to Wing 3. I see P-40s at static. Is anyone alive? Why isn't anyone answering?" Meanwhile, American transcripts from the same battle show precise coordination. "Red leader to Red 2, bogey at your 6 o'clock. Red 2, got it, breaking left. Red 3, cover him. Red 4, with me on the boom." It was the difference between chaos and control. By May 1942, when the Flying Tigers were officially incorporated into the US Army Air Force, their final records showed 296 Japanese aircraft destroyed versus 14 P-40s lost in air-to-air combat, a final ratio of 21-1. But even that number was conservative. It didn't include damaged Japanese planes that never made it back to base, nor those destroyed on the ground. A post-war report compiled by American intelligence estimated that the real number of Japanese losses may have reached 400 aircraft, considering those that crashed on the way back or were cannibalized for parts due to damage. The impact on Japanese resources was calculated at over $1 billion in today's values. For a country already stretched to the limit, it was a blow from which it never fully recovered. Japanese General Masaharu Homma, executed for war crimes in 1946, made an extraordinary confession before he died. "We lost the war the day we decided to lie to our own soldiers. When you hide the truth from your own forces, you've already lost. The Americans trusted their pilots with the truth. We treated them like children who needed to be protected. That was our fatal mistake. Homer had been one of the few senior officers to question the censorship policy. In a memo to the Imperial General Staff, he argued, "If we cannot trust our men with the truth, how can we trust them with our lives? An army built on lies is a house of cards. The first strong wind will blow it down." His memo was ignored, and he was transferred to the Philippines, where his eventual defeat and capture sealed his fate. The final word on the episode came from an unexpected place. In 1995, during a reunion of American and Japanese veterans, former Zero pilot Kaname Harada, then 78 years old, stood up and said, "For 50 years I believed we were superior but unlucky. Now I know the truth. The Flying Tigers were simply better than us. Not in courage, not in individual skill, but in thinking about war differently. They fought with their heads. We fought with our hearts." In modern warfare, the head always wins. The response came from Robert R.T. Smith, a Flying Tigers ace with 8.9 victories, then 77 years old. "Mr. Harada, you and your comrades were the bravest pilots we ever faced. If you had the same tactics and information as we did, the outcome might have been different. The war wasn't won by moral or racial superiority. It was won by whoever adapted faster to the reality of modern warfare." The two veterans embraced. A moment of reconciliation captured in a photograph that became a symbol of post-war healing. The historical data you've just learned remained classified for decades. Japanese archives burned before the surrender. American documents sealed for national security, personal diaries hidden out of shame or fear. Many of the most shocking details only emerged as the war generation began to die, and their families donated personal documents to historical archives. Every year, new revelations emerge, painting an increasingly complete picture of the true nature of the air war over China. If you value this kind of real historical content, based on primary documents that took generations to be revealed, consider the impact these revelations have on our understanding of war. These aren't just numbers and statistics. They are human stories of courage, fear, misplaced honor, and the fatal consequences of refusing to face the truth. YouTube has super thanks, that golden heart down there. When you use it, you're allowing more time to be dedicated to researching forgotten archives, translating documents in old Japanese, cross-referencing multiple sources. Each super thanks means one more untold story of World War II that can finally see the light. It's not just support for the channel, it's the preservation of real history, not the Hollywood version. The legacy of Japanese censorship regarding the Flying Tigers' losses taught a valuable lesson to modern militaries. Today, American military doctrine emphasizes honest after-action reports, where failures are discussed openly. The Pentagon has an unofficial phrase, "Remember the 15-1, a direct reference to the disaster caused when you hide the truth from your own forces. Colonel John Boyd, the military strategist who revolutionized modern air combat with his OODA loop theory, observe, orient, decide, act, extensively studied the Flying Tigers' tactics. He concluded, "Chanot understood before anyone else that air war isn't about planes fighting planes. It's about systems fighting systems. The Japanese system was superior in individual components, better pilots, more maneuverable aircraft. But the American system was superior in integration, tactics, intelligence, communication, adaptation. In modern warfare, the system always wins over the individual." Interestingly, modern China intensely studies the Flying Tigers tactics. In 2019, the People's Liberation Army Air Force Academy published a 400-page study on Chanot's tactics. calling them the first example of modern asymmetrical air warfare. The study concludes, a smaller but more intelligent force can defeat a larger but rigid force. The Chinese study goes further, suggesting that the lessons of the Flying Tigers are applicable to modern cyber warfare, just as Chinook used the strengths of the P-40 against the weaknesses of the Zero. Smaller cyber forces can exploit vulnerabilities in larger but more rigid systems. The key isn't having more resources, but using them more intelligently. It's an interpretation Chinook would likely approve of. The final numbers, compiled from American, Japanese, and Chinese sources, are impressive. During their 7 months of operation, the Flying Tigers shot down 296 confirmed Japanese aircraft, possibly destroyed another 150 unconfirmed, lost 14 P-40s in air combat, lost 9 P-40s to anti-aircraft fire, lost 61 P-40s in operational accidents. The total cost of the operation was approximately $8 million in 1942 dollars. The damage inflicted on Japan was estimated at $600 million in today's values. The cost-benefit ratio of 75-1 remains unparalleled in military history. But perhaps the most striking number is this. Of the original 100 Flying Tigers pilots, 79 survived the war, a 79% survival rate in one of the most dangerous combat zones of World War II. Compare that to equivalent Japanese units, where the survival rate rarely exceeded 30%. It was definitive proof that Chinook's tactics didn't just win battles, they saved lives. A final detail, discovered only in 2018 when private archives were digitized, the Japanese created a secret unit in June 1942 specifically to develop tactics against the Flying Tigers, codenamed Project 15, a direct reference to the loss rate. The unit worked for 3 months before being disbanded. Their conclusion: in a report to the Emperor, there is no tactical solution to doctrinal inferiority. We need to change how we think about war, not how we fight war. The leader of Project 15, Colonel Minoru Genda, who had planned the attack on Pearl Harbor, wrote in his personal notes, "We studied every engagement, every maneuver, every tactic of the Flying Tigers. The conclusion is inescapable. They are not better pilots. Their planes are not superior, but their system is. They transformed air war into science, while we insisted on treating it as art. Art is beautiful. Science wins wars." But it was too late. The damage to Japanese morale, economy, and combat capability was irreversible. The decision to censor losses, taken to protect morale, ultimately guaranteed defeat. The lie intended to strengthen became the poison that slowly killed the Japanese Air Force. As one Flying Tigers veteran said, 50 years later, we won the war in the Pacific in the skies over China. It wasn't at Midway, it wasn't at Guadalcanal. It was when we proved that the myth of Japanese superiority was just that, a myth. Once that myth was broken, even if only we knew it at first, the outcome of the war was decided. The rest was just a matter of time and blood. What aspect impressed you most? The fact that Japan literally forbade reporting real losses? The 15-to-1 kill ratio that defied all military logic? Or that 50 American pilots changed the course of the Pacific War? Share in the comments, and if you have documents or family stories about the Pacific War, especially aviation, please share. Every preserved memory is a piece of history we cannot afford to lose. The truth, however painful, is always preferable to the comfortable lie. That was the final lesson of the Flying Tigers, a lesson written in fire in the skies of China, paid for with blood on both sides, and finally revealed decades later when secret archives were opened and the old warriors could finally tell their truths.